Sage Wanderer coming at you from my van down by the river. Well, you know, my MK Ultra trainer story has over 500,000 views here on YouTube. And that's just a short video. I've done a couple of short videos on this subject. But you know, I had a 4-hour conversation with this woman. And we talked a lot about this brainwashing technique that I refer to as MK Ultra. She just called it training. And it's this Illuminati group that's trying to take over the world, apparently. And if you don't know the story, go back and see the video, the first video I did. But I'm going to continue to do videos on this topic so that I can tell you more details about the 4-hour conversation that I had with her that day. So one of the things I would like to talk about now is a disturbing topic, but it's a question that I had to ask her, since part of the discussion we had was about how the Illuminati had taken her children away and that she was struggling to regain custody of her kids. And so, being a youth pastor at the time, the children's well-being in all of this were, of a heightened concern to me. And so it was inevitable that I would ask the question of her, because she did say that, that's how I knew she took the kids with them when they went out to get this training and to do this training to these tent camp cities in the wilderness in the middle of the night. That they would get their call phrase or whatever and come out into their new persona, or their real personas, I suppose, and they would get their kids out of bed and make them go with them. And so I asked her, what happens to the kids while you're torturing these people and while you're doing all these experiments and mind control and training on these people? What happens to your kids? And she says to me, well, they go through training too. We all did. We all do. Everyone does. And I said, so the things that you do to other people that you've told me about, this torture, and I used the word, this torture that they call training, you let them do that to your children? And she said, yes. It just seems normal to you once you've been through the training yourself. And you understand that it's for a greater goal, and therefore everyone has to go through it. And she says they convinced her that it made her a better person, that she was superhuman, because she could be fragmented in that way and be this vault of information storage, since she could be used so powerfully in all of the capacities that they used her in, that her children were becoming greater, like her, like an evolved species almost, and that this process that they were putting them through was necessary. And I said, do they make you torture your own kids? And she says, well, they kind of reserve that for punishment for people who are not performing properly. But if, you're a good citizen, if you do everything you're supposed to, then someone else does your kids. Although everyone is required to sit in at least once on the sessions of training, just to break that part of their will so that they see and know firsthand what it is that they're doing. It plays into their commitment level, to increase their commitment level to it and make it more real for them. All of this was so mind-boggling to me. I can't tell you. This is why I sat and let her talk for 4 hours. And I only asked a few questions at different places where I needed more information or I didn't understand something. But pretty much, I just let her spill her guts for 4 hours. And honestly, if she'd approached me any differently in an official pastoral position, I would not have been able to share with you the things that she told me. I can only share this story with you because it was in such a casual manner after we had disassociated each other, and I told her up front, I said, look, I can't be a pastor to you, I have to respect what my bishop told me. And before we sat down, I said, so everything you say to me is just, because you're here and you're getting involved in ministry, I can say we're just colleagues, and that this is not a pastoral thing, and this is not a confession. I made that clear with her, because there's a lot of ethical lines there that I didn't want to cross. But back to what she was saying, to me, that was some of the most devastating and the most difficult parts for me to understand in her story is how a woman could turn her own children over to this and let them do it. How they could all do this. How sons could turn their daughters over for sexual abuse. And I said to her, I said, why do they have to do it to the children? And she said, because there's not a greater subject than one who has been trained at infancy. She said, you're a piano player and a great piano player. And I know from your story that you started at a very young age with music. And I said, yeah, as soon as I was old enough to drag pots and pans out from underneath the cabinet and bang on them like drums, I guess. So toddler age. And she says, yeah. I wanted to dig deeper and go, how young did they start? What kind of torture are they doing to these little bitty children? But honestly, I just didn't have the nerve. There's some things you just don't want to hear. I guess I could imagine, and I didn't need to know. But she said that especially when they're training children who would go on to become these, the sex slaves. And, you know, there was a big reason that a lot of these children were given over or taken or collected from around the world through various sources at infant age. And they were raised up for the purpose of being breeders. Human beings that don't exist, that are off of the charts. There's no birth record of them. It's like they never existed. And if you can get children, babies like that, then you can raise them up, especially females, to be breeders. And then all of their babies also don't exist and have no record. And you can create these faceless, nameless, identityless people. And you can shape them into whatever hideous thing you want to make them from infancy. And that it's all a kind of mind control game from day one. And, you know, she said those kind of people, whether they're trained to be breeders, sexual slaves, whether they're trained to be operatives, is what she would call them. She considered herself a trainer, but she was cross-trained as an operative, and she trained operatives primarily. That was what the department she worked in, was to basically train these sleeper cells, the assassins. But there were multiple kinds of mind slaves with different kinds of training, but they all started really at their root source with this sort of visual torture, emotional breakdown. You know, that was another thing she said. You could skip a lot of the brain rewiring when you started with a very young person, because then you could just immediately start programming without having to break down the personality, because the personality isn't formed yet. I mean, you can see this is a 4-hour conversation, in-depth discussion I had with this person who claimed to be one of the people who did this bizarre thing, who helped build this secret army that apparently lays in wait for us to be activated. And, you know, I personally have come to believe that many of these mass shooters are people that have undergone this sort of treatment, this sort of torture, this sort of mind control programming, potentially from birth. Maybe they're real people that have been kidnapped. You know, there's a whole profile of people that could be this MK Ultra style sleeper cell programmed by these Illuminati, deep state, new world order globalists who are trying to overthrow every government on earth and bring about an end times new world order dictatorship, a draconian totalitarian state, a police state, a state of total control. I would say at this point, God save our republic, but really God needs to save the world from these people, because I see them moving, and I believe more and more every day the things that this woman told me, and I believe they're true, and we're seeing the fruit of all of that labor from all of those years ago coming against us now in this evil force that seems to be gripping the world. God save us all.